what's up, everybody? I'm excited. Today we have Will Ratelle, who we had on an episode of Cutoffs and Coffee about a year ago. Anyway, Will Ratelle is a NCAA Division I strength coach at North Dakota. He is working with their football program, their volleyball program. In addition to that, he also has what's called the Haas Project. All right, the Haas Project is an online training program that you can purchase, and a couple of these different products. One of them is the original Haas Project. All right, and he is coming out with the Haas Olympic Project. So that's what we're going to be talking about today on this episode of Cutoffs and Coffee. And I am very excited to hear Will's perspective, all right, on Olympic lifting and how do we develop those foundations, as well as a sneak peek into some of the exercises and movements and philosophies behind the Haas Olympic Project. And today's episode is going to be brought to you, since we need to keep our squats squatty, all right, the wedge from Underdog Fitness, right? So this is one of our favorite tools that we use at T3 Performance to make sure that we keep our squats squatty and our hinges hingy. So that 2-inch heel elevation can help athletes get into the deepest of their squat positions comfortably, all right, without any knee pain, right, while maintaining an upright torso. So that is the sponsorship for today. But without any further ado, let's get right into this episode with the Haas himself, Will Ratelle. Coach Will, what's going on? Welcome back to the show, man. I'm happy to have you here. How you been?
Good, man. How are you?
Can't complain. It's summer. Our college athletes are home, so we're getting a hell of a lot of quality training sessions in, and I'm excited to dive into your new program that you got going on, the Haas Olympic Project. Absolutely. Man. I think we start just by doing like a little quick background on what you're doing now and what kind of programs you've been putting out and what this new one's all about.
Yeah, so I'll just give you a brief overview of Haas Olympic. So I have the Haas Project that I dropped in, I think it was November of 2021. And that does not include Olympic weightlifting movements. And so I got a lot of questions on Instagram saying, people asking before they purchase it, hey, is there Olympic lifting in this program? I always tell them no, because I didn't put it in because I don't feel comfortable putting Olympic lifting in for people who aren't very proficient, who don't have a coach, who've never learned it before. And if they're doing it on their own, they're just not going to get much of a training effect from it. So I didn't put it into the Haas Project. And then I would get questions from people after they bought it saying, hey, can I put Olympic lifting in this and still get good results? So I decided to make a Haas Olympic. And really the purpose of it is the same as the Haas Project: get big, strong, fast, be athletic, but just incorporating a lot of the Olympic weightlifting movements in it. The goal isn't to increase your total on the platform. So if you are like a competitive weightlifter, it's probably not the best for you because there's a lot of other stuff in there that's going to take away from your ability to compete on the platform. So yeah, the goal is it's a strength and conditioning program, an ebook. The ebook just kind of talks about my justifications for or why I'm a proponent for the Olympic weightlifting movements and a strength and conditioning program when you're just training to be a good field sport or team sport athlete. So yeah, that's the whole purpose behind it.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And I would even think there would be some benefit for a competitive Olympic weightlifter in the off season to jump on some of this programming just to get them out of the rut of what they typically do. And from knowing you for a while, like, knowing what you put together for people, it does get people jacked and strong legs. And that's, what you need as a weightlifter. So, I got a couple questions on an IG poll I put out to kind of preface this conversation. So I think we could dive into some of those. You already answered the first one, which is what is the goal of the Haas Olympic program. But after posting those videos, people wanted to know what your best lifts were. So what was your best snatch ever? And what's your best clean and jerk or clean ever? And then what do you front squat and deadlift?
Okay, so my best ever for snatch is 150 kg. And that was a few years ago when I was taking it a lot more serious than I do now. Now I kind of just do it once every 2 or 3 weeks when I want to do something fun. I'll snatch or I'll clean and jerk. So 150 for snatch, 195 for clean and jerk, 195 for clean, and 195 for jerk. So I got both of them in the same. And then front squat, I have no idea what my best front squat was back in the day. Probably say like 210, 220 kg. Right now it's probably like 190, maybe 200. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Yeah. Oh, I guess my best snatch right now is probably, I could probably hit 140 on a good day from the floor. My best clean, I just hit 185 a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if I could beat that right now. And then my best jerk, dude, I have no idea what my best jerk would be right now. I do not jerk very often. I don't find it very fun. I'm bad at it. I bet I could hit like 160 if I were to max on a jerk. So yeah, not as good as my other two lifts.
Yeah, in the sport of weightlifting, I think that's pretty consistent with like most people like do not like the jerk, and it's just from what they grew up learning. Everybody, most people have learned the snatch or the clean at some point, and then they go into weightlifting and don't have a ton of experience, and the jerk's really frustrating. And I'm like a personal example where my best clean's 140, my best jerk's 125, so there's a big difference for me in those, and it's just because training preferences, like my goals aren't to be the best I can be on a platform. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing for as long as I can. But that's definitely
well, hey, like one thing I want to get your
yeah.
I want to get your stance on this. So in my opinion, jerk out of the three Olympic lifts is the easiest to learn, but it's the hardest to perform under a heavy load. Would you agree with that? Is that your experience too?
Yeah, I would say that like the
I can get someone to jerk pretty well in like day one, day two. But then when you start really loading the bar up, for some reason, like committing to getting under the bar, getting that head through, and stabilizing the bar overhead is like really hard for people.
Yeah, and it's partly like the you don't really see where the weight is. So like you just feel the massive amount of weight. But like learning it, like if you have any understanding of like just displacement, like that's all you're doing is you're just displacing that weight for a split second to move under it. But like moving under it and putting a decent amount of weight over your head is pretty scary. And most of the time in the lifting programs that I've put people through, there's usually only like one day where we're only working on the jerk as a separate movement. So usually you're already under fatigue because you've had to clean and stand up a pretty heavy weight. But yeah, that's pretty consistent. Is like the jerk is just a frustrating movement, but it's easy to get some reps at and learn the movement. But then to be able to load it close to your clean is pretty challenging, and it's a long process.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of brings us in, like we talked about some of the like the jerk as a movement. What are some of the foundations that set a weightlifter up? And this could go along the lines of an athlete first, weightlifter second kind of approach. What are some of those foundations that people want to drive their training towards to become as successful as they can in that sport or in the sport of weightlifting?
Okay, so I'll kind of answer this so the way I'll view it is, if you want to use the Olympic lifts in your training program, even if you're not a competitive weightlifter, make sure you're proficient in the front squat, high bar back squat, RDL, even deadlifting from the floor. And then you do the appropriate amount of drill work that you need to do in order to have like an efficient bar path, and you're hitting all the right positions from the floor, from the first pull to the second pull to transitioning under the bar, whether that's, I don't know, any drill work could be like a muscle clean, a full trap clean, like a high hip clean, a high hip snatch. What else? Something like a split jerk balance or a behind the neck press in a split position. Making sure you're really good at all that drill work, and then you hammer home front squat, RDL, high bar back squat, and then I would even say deadlift. I don't know how common like a true deadlift is for competitive weightlifters. Is that an exercise competitive weightlifters use a lot?
Yeah, but so like if you look at the setup of a traditional deadlift versus a weightlifter that has clean pull would be the term that they would use, and it's just like a deadlift in your clean form. Most, if I'm deadlifting to max out, like I'm gonna let my hips go early because that's gonna let me lift the most weight. But if I'm training the deadlift as a movement to help me with my Olympic lifts, I'm gonna make sure that my like torso and my hips are rising the same as they would unfold in a clean movement so that I can match that strength. Because you could deadlift all you want, but if your setup's not going to be the same, it won't translate into the sport of weightlifting.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, when it comes to like the drill work for like a clean or snatch, get really good at that first pull, just pulling the bar from the floor to your knee, maintaining the back angle that you need to. Think quads off the floor, so you're not relying too much on your hips. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the consistency of like success that I've seen. And there are some anomalies in the weightlifting world of athletes who can let their hips go and still be able to recover and get a good pull. And you see that like more in the Russians. So like if you look at the Chinese weightlifting teams, they're very pushy, right? They're very quad dominant in their first push off the floor to the knee. But then if you look at most of the Russians, their anatomy is set up a little differently where their hips are going to be slightly higher. So it's kind of good to see those different countries compete in the sport because they're pretty consistent with their anatomies at different sizes. But that's that's the key foundation of the sport is like how well do you move the bar from the floor to your knee? Are your front squat's going to set the limits for what you can clean, and then your overhead squats are going to set the higher limits of what you can snatch. So in theory, if you have proficient enough technique, the more you overhead squat, the more you front squat, the higher potential you have to snatch and clean more.
Are there any exercises that I missed out on that you would suggest, whether you're just a strength athlete or like a competitive weightlifter or a team sport athlete, that you should really hammer on?
Yeah, so you nailed what you need for the snatch in the clean. I utilize a lot of push presses and power jerks to lay the foundations for the split jerk. I feel like when we get into split jerks, it's really easy to avoid driving hard off of both legs because you are allowed to move fast and split your feet, as opposed to the power jerks and the push presses. Reinforce good movement patterns of how you dip and how you drive vertically first. Whereas like people that are learning split jerks right away, it might be easy for them, but they might develop bad habits that don't let them get enough drive into the bar to then move under it. But yeah, those are the basics aren't the fun part, but it's like what gives you the highest potential down the road is just being really, really good at the squats and the pulls.
Yeah.
So I got a question about limited shoulder range of motion and the overhead squat, and I wanted to get your take on how do we improve that overhead squat? It seems to be one of those popular movements on Instagram to post about your perfect form in an overhead squat these days. But I want to hear it from you. Like if you're talking to an athlete who's working on their shoulder range of motion, how can they get better at overhead squats?
Yeah, so I would say obviously you got to do a lot of overhead squatting. And the two drills that I would recommend people do would just be like a snatch balance. Even if you just do it with an empty bar, it's probably going to help you quite a bit getting comfortable sitting in that overhead squat position. So you snatch balance, slowly press yourself into that overhead squat, sit there, even bounce a little bit before you stand up out of the hole. And then a drop snatch. I like to load a drop snatch. I guess for people who don't know the difference between a snatch balance and a drop snatch, drop snatch, you are physically dropping, you are lifting your feet up off the ground, dropping into an overhead squat, locking out with a good overhead position with the bar over your head, and then standing up out of the hole. Whereas a snatch balance, you just slowly press yourself into that overhead squat. So out of those two drills, I would make sure you get really good at those, get comfortable with that. And then I even just like doing dead hangs, loaded or unloaded dead hangs, and slowly bring your hands more narrow in the grip. So those would be the three things that I would recommend. And I feel like that's probably going to help a lot of people out.
Yeah, and that's the tough answer that people don't want to hear is like, I want to get better at my overhead squat. What should I do? Well, you should overhead squat more. And I think that is where the low hanging fruit really comes from. In my experience, the one time this gets a little bit of a gray area is if it's actually shoulder mobility versus ankle mobility. So even if I'm hearing an athlete kind of talk about like some limiting issues with the shoulder, I'm going to kind of check where they're at in that overhead squat to see if I can elevate their heels to make that a more comfortable position for them. And that's what the lifters do, the actual, like the shoes, the lifters. And I've seen you use a couple different pairs, and I've been through a bunch, but honestly, like some athletes need more of an elevation, and I'm okay with training a higher elevation in our overhead squats for that heel lift than they actually would use in the shoe, because it reinforces proper positions in that overhead movement. All right, complexes. So you had a really good post on complexes a couple weeks ago, and one of the questions I got: what is your favorite clean complex to utilize with your athletes, and what is your favorite snatch complex? And I think one of the points that you made in that video was the rhythm of the complexes paired with like it's actually going to be a way to sneak in some additional reps. I think you worded it much more concisely, but yeah, go ahead. Why you like complexes, and then what your favorite ones are.
All right, so my favorite ones would be, it's going to be the same for the clean and the snatch, and that's just going to be a pull into a power clean or a power snatch into a hang full clean or hang full snatch. So those would be my favorite ones to use. So what I like complexes a lot for is the variability from rep to rep. You're still doing the same general movement, but the task is a little bit different. It relates a lot to sports in that sense, because in sports you are repeating a lot of the same tasks over and over and over again with slight variation in the environment. So it relates to sports in that way. The other thing I like about Olympic lifting, I mean, this isn't specifically to complexes, but Olympic lifting in general, is how precise you have to be with your force production. So you can't just grip the bar and rip it as hard as you can, because you're going to hit yourself in the chin, or you're just going to lose control. We've all had that happen to us before. And so being precise and being accurate with the force that you're producing into the bar is very important. I kind of relate this to sports. An easy example of this would be like a basketball player who needs to fight through contact to take the ball to the rim. You can't just lower your shoulder and run into somebody. You have to do it in a strategic manner. So you have to produce enough force at a high enough rate to fight through the contact without fouling somebody. And like in the ebook, it goes over this in a lot more articulate fashion than I'm speaking in right now, and more elaborate. So that's another thing. I think the Olympic lifts and complexes do a really good job of training. We've all heard like the term tissue resiliency and tissue robustness. I think they do probably a better job of training your tissues to be resilient against contact and preparing your tissues for contact better than anything else in the weight room. So a lot of times people think of like slow eccentrics, isometrics, high rep accessory work for like tissue robustness. I don't know if, I'm sure you've heard that too, James. But like, what's better than actually having to take contact from the bar at a high speed, dropping into the bottom of a clean, you know what I mean? Like preparing for contact in that sense. So, and then as far as like conditioning goes, so in sports, well, we'll talk about in Olympic lifting, when you do a complex, you are like constantly and quickly alternating between like a quick, short, efficient breath, and then using the Valsalva maneuver to brace and produce force into the bar. And if you do a set of like 4 or 5 reps of, let's just say you're doing a pull into 2 power cleans into 2 hang cleans, that's 5 reps right there. And it is a constant altering between the Valsalva maneuver to brace for contact, to brace to produce force into the bar, and then a quick, short, efficient breath, which is what you're doing in sports. I'll just use basketball again. Like you're defending someone and you're fighting through a screen. You got to brace for that contact. And then there's some space that you got to cover, and you got to take a quick breath in. This like alternating between Valsalva and quick, short, efficient breath. So I don't know if I really answered the question, but that's something that I think a lot of people don't really realize that the Olympic lifts train for in a very general sense. So I don't want people to like misunderstand what I'm saying, that it's like specific in that sense to sports, but it trains all these qualities really effectively in a general way. So that's kind of my long-winded answer. And I don't even know if I answered the question.
No, you definitely did. And I think one thing to add to that too is like, you know, the athlete that is doing multiple reps in a single set, the weight stays the same, but how heavy that weight is perceived to feel can change based on how well they move it. So there's opportunities for athletes to adjust and auto-regulate when we do have complexes, because it's not just a singular rep. Whereas like they can adjust how they just did that low hang clean or that power clean and maybe the second rep felt faster than the first rep because they adjusted something and they were able to kind of manage their speeds and their power output in a way that helped them move that weight, which is the same, a little bit more efficient. And then they're going to remember that feeling and be able to carry it over into their next set. And I think we miss out on that until we're doing those multiple rep movements. And the complexes help people string those movements together, from how they move in a power clean versus how they move in a clean, and find some consistency in their movement patterns. And it helps them auto regulate without a coach having to really say anything, except maybe have a conversation post set. Hey, what did you feel in that third rep? That looked way faster. What did you adjust? And you have a really good open-ended conversation that can help the athlete make those adjustments down the road on themselves and be more independent. So yeah, I think my favorite complexes are anytime we're crossing the knee multiple times to kind of elicit that. So it would be, starting the same way with a snatch or a clean pull, staying extended in that pull, and then crossing the knee multiple times into the receiving positions. And I think it does find the rhythm and the timing of those movements to carry over. If we are a weightlifter, it'll definitely carry over to understand like what's the perceived effort they need to lift this weight in a competition setting when they only have 3 opportunities to execute those movements in each lift in a competition. So yeah, from moving on from the complexes, and these are a couple questions I put together for you. Get an opportunity to pick your brain on weightlifting and just getting strong in general. How do you go about your exercise selection given the course of a week? If you have athletes that are going to be weightlifting in that training program, how do you go about picking, like, how many days are we snatching? How many days are we cleaning? What is too much? What's enough? What's your take on that?
Yeah. So with the Haas Olympic, I have all 3 of the Olympic lift movements. I have clean, jerk, and snatch. So I have in the program, I have clean twice a week. It's an upper lower split. It's 4 days a week. So clean twice a week, snatch twice a week. And then depending on, the phase of the program, they might be jerking once a week or twice a week. I really struggled with the program trying to decide the frequency of each lift. Just because you're not going to be able to please everybody. Like, there's going to be some people who buy it who they don't jerk, they only clean and snatch. There's going to be some people who buy it who only clean. There's going to be a ton of variation of level of athletes, I guess, who buy the program. So you're not going to be able to please everybody. So that's the way I programmed it. With the athletes that I work with, so the volleyball players, they clean, they snatch, and they jerk. The basketball guys, I don't have them do any Olympic lifting. Football guys, so I'll talk about volleyball. We only train 3 days a week for the volleyball team. So I just have them clean once a week, they snatch once a week, and they jerk once a week. And then the rest of the training sessions, they're just doing like basic strength work. That would probably change if they train more than 3 times a week, but that's just a really easy, simple way to logistically put it in. Then football guys, so I don't program for football, but I work with football here on campus. They do 4 days a week. So I think they clean twice a week, they snatch once a week, and they jerk once a week. So they put more of an emphasis on the clean. I guess that makes sense. You can just load up a clean heavier than the snatch and the jerk. And the clean is just a much more like common movement that people learn at an earlier age. So if kids are coming from high school, they've probably cleaned if they've gone through any sort of strength and conditioning program. So it's really easy to put that in. And we don't really emphasize the jerk and the snatch as much. I think we only snatch from the hang. And I think we only power jerk. We never split, just because the split jerk is going to complicate things for a lot of athletes who don't spend a lot of time working on it. And when you're working with team sport athletes, you only have 45 minutes or 60 minutes to get a session in. If you really want to get good at the Olympic lifts, you have to spend a lot of time doing the necessary drill work, which I think we talked about a little bit. Like, if you want to get good at a split jerk, you have to be good at any sort of the drill work, like a behind the neck press in a split position, getting really comfortable, getting your head through the hole and locking out overhead. You have to be really good at like a muscle snatch or a high hip snatch. And you just don't have time to like practice that stuff pre like before you're actually getting into your working sets with team sport athletes. So logistically, it makes programming a little bit tougher, but also in a way it's simpler because you don't have to worry about it. So that's been my experience with my athletes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like in my experience, there's been times where I've gone back and forth from like when I first started, I was all gung ho because I had just got my USAW and I just started competing in the weightlifting, and like I had a little bit more Olympic weightlifting in what I've taken out from what I used to do was some of that drill work, understanding it's not eliciting the performance outcomes that I wanted for these athletes who are preparing for sport. So yeah, maybe it would be beneficial to increase our power jerk by doing more like prep work behind the neck work right before we did the power jerks. But in that team setting, we just would run out of time, and we'd leave time spent on the main thing, which maybe that day is a clean pull or a deadlift, and we'd lose out on time and intention in that movement because I was trying to add too much to get their power jerk up, which I had to realize that was for me, not for them. And so I think those are some of the lessons I've learned along the way, which have kind of helped me navigate how much to Olympic lift athletes versus if I am working with a competitive weightlifter, like they will need to spend a little bit more time in the gym, and it might not be as intense time, but it's just learning those movement patterns and getting comfortable with them. So
yeah, when I'm doing a session for my, like if I'm going to go snatch one day, it's going to take me probably 20 minutes before I put real working weight for working sets on the bar, because I'll do at least at a minimum 1 set of 10 of an overhead squat. I'll do at least 1 set of 10 of a snatch balance, a drop snatch. I'll muscle snatch. I'll do some first pulls. I'll do some high hip snatch. I'll do all of the drill work that I feel like I need to do, and that takes 10 to 15 minutes. And then you have your warm-up sets where you just put 70 kg on the bar, then 90, then 100, and like it takes a long time before you actually get into working sets. And so when you're working with team sport athletes, you just don't have the time to do that. So you got to kind of pick your battles.
yeah, and I used to I used to be able to warm up more quickly to heavier weights, and I'm just getting older, and so I do need that that added time if I am going to be receiving bars in a full snatch position. It personally takes me a while to get warm enough to be able to comfortably and confident start snatching with some relatively heavy weight. And with the athletes, it's their time. How can we use it most effectively? Which actually leads us into kind of the next question, which is so when you're training athletes, not weightlifting the sport, what are markers of proficient movers for athletes? What do you see when you're training an athlete that you can identify? Okay, hey, this is getting the training stimulus that I'm wanting to see from them. And what are some of those technical like common mistakes that maybe athletes make that don't allow them to get the training stimulus you're looking for?
So there'd probably be two main things. And I'll talk about clean and snatch for this one. I want them to be able to maintain good positioning off the floor. So their first pull should look good. So they should be able to maintain their back angle that I want them to maintain. I don't want to see their ass shoot up too early. I don't want to see them try to get vertical too early where they're looping the bar around the knee. So the bar path is all jagged. And then I want to see them finish their pull. I want to see them be able to get tall, get extended, have a good brush point. So if it's a snatch, it should be a little bit higher up, maybe like on your belt line or waistline is where the brush point should be. If it's a clean, it's like mid to upper thigh. And I think those are the two most common mistakes that I see is people, their first pull is all fucked up. And when you fuck up the first pull, it makes the second pull a lot harder. And then people just not finishing their pull. So people cutting the hip extension a little bit short because maybe they're trying to rush under the bar too quickly or something like that. But those would be the two main things that I want to see for an athlete to give the training stimulus that I want.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned like the first pull and how important it is, because like I'll be coaching kids in competition or athletes in a weightlifting competition. I'll know by the time the bar gets to their knee whether they're going to make that lift or not. And it's just like such a pivotal point where like we can either set ourselves up to have everything go well, or if we screw that first pull up, I know right away before we even finish the movement that's going to be a missed lift, or they're going to have to do something crazy to save it. So we have proficiency, right? Which is kind of what we just talked about with like athletic development. And then from like a weightlifting side of things, I think there's like an efficiency component. And like I don't have a great way of describing it or like being able to like see, like explain what I'm seeing differently from an athlete to a weightlifter. But I think if we look at numbers, and we have an athlete that can overhead squat, let's say 110, their snatches and they're snatching 100, that's going to be somebody who's very efficient. From an athletic standpoint, like I have a lot of athletes that can front squat a hell of a lot more than they can full clean. And that's because they're proficient in their power cleans, but they might not be efficient pulling under. You mentioned in the Haas Olympic project that you have a special day kind of designated for athletes to work on their efficiency. Do you want to kind of dive into that a little bit and talk about that bonus day where they get to pick and choose where they're working their weak points?
Yeah, so it's really whoever the user is, it's kind of up to their responsibility to figure out what drill work they need. Maybe some people only need snatch drill work. Maybe some people need clean and snatch and jerk drill work. But I'll kind of go over some of the drills that I have in here. Mm-hmm. So for the snatch, I obviously have overhead squat. There's a snatch balance, a drop snatch, a tall snatch high pull. If you're familiar with that, you're just in a tall standing position, big chest. You're just driving the elbows, and I cue it elbows high and wide, not elbows back. If you can kind of picture what that looks like. And then a muscle snatch, a first pull, and then a high hip snatch, and then a snatch press. So a snatch press, I think that's really hard for a lot of people to do, like a sauce press. So you can just do it standing, you can do it sitting. And then the better you get, you can just progress by sitting lower and lower. And then eventually getting to a sauce press, which most athletes are not going to be able to do. I can't even do it. And I think I'm pretty proficient at the snatch. And then for a clean, to be a muscle clean, a full trap clean. Should I go over any of these, or just people can
they can get the program. They can get the program.
Yeah.
But I think that gives us a general sense of, hey, if part of your goal by getting the Haas project is to become a better Olympic lifter, not just get jacked and super strong and be able to dunk, then this is the drill work that's going to provide you that opportunity to refine your skill in your craft. It's funny you talk about the elbow.
Yeah, I would just say, like, for anyone who needs to do the drill work, is if you have some sort of limiting factor that is inhibiting your ability to perform at a high level, just go ahead and do the drill work. Some people won't need it, but there's a bunch of drills in here. So if people get it, they're going to have a lot of options to choose from. There's demonstrations, there's cues, and instructions on how to do the lifts too. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, my favorite cue for getting people's elbows verticals is to zip up the hoodie. I always talk about zipping.
Yeah, I say zip up the jacket.
Zip up the hoodie.
Yep.
That's one of my favorites. Yep. Awesome. So I kind of wanted to wrap up with this question and really hear your take on this. But, from your experience, you've been throwing around heavyweights for a while. You've been in a weight room, you've been coaching, whether that's online or whether that's, in person with your teams, and you've been around the iron sports. What is missing from weightlifting programs and coaching approaches that you've encountered in your experience, whether that's in the sport of weightlifting or strength and conditioning in general?
Yeah, so I'll answer this. So I'll change the question a little bit to like, what's missing in strength and conditioning when people discuss whether or not they should use the Olympic lifts in their programming. Because most people will talk about power output, like peak power, peak rate of force development, and they'll use that as their proxy as why they choose other exercise modalities instead of the Olympic lifts. But the Olympic lifts just train so many more components to athleticism than a lot of people realize, and now it's becoming so dogmatic. Like there's the ideologues who will say you have to Olympic lift. If you don't Olympic lift, you're not going to develop as an athlete. And then you have the ideologues who will say never do Olympic lifting, it's a waste of your time. You don't really get as good of a training effect as you would doing loaded jumps. And that's because they have this shallow view. They only see Olympic weightlifting as training for power. So I'll kind of ramble off a few things a few benefits that I think Olympic lifting offers. I think it actually provides a much better muscle building stimulus, and I think people give it credit for. I mean, just think about the time under tension your entire posterior chain and your upper back when you're holding a barbell and you're doing a complex of a snatch, like a clean complex or snatch complex. Tons of time under tension. And then if you look at it through like the effective reps model, you're familiar with the effective reps model, James? Yeah. So like for a rep to be effective at eliciting hypertrophy adaptations, you got to recruit high threshold motor units, and the contraction speed has to be slow. The contraction speed is actually pretty slow if you're doing a really heavy clean. And you're obviously recruiting high threshold motor units. So like, it's a pretty effective stimulus for muscle building. I've talked about upper body power. I don't think upper body power is really something that's super valuable for most athletes, because sporting actions it's still going to be heavily reliant on ground reaction forces. But if I am going to accept the term upper body power, I don't know what's going to train upper body power better than a muscle snatch, a power snatch. And when you're pulling on the bar, you are associating the upper limbs with the lower limbs in order to move the bar, and you're ripping hard on that bar, turning it over, catching it overhead. That's going to train upper body power much better than something like a medicine ball toss, which is like a common means of training for upper body power. And again, sorry, I'm not being very articulate. It goes into more depth in the ebook. And then I say like repeated rate of force development in a multi-effort action. So like I said, rate of force development is often used as a justification for Olympic weightlifting, but also as a justification to not use rate of force development, because it can be trained in so many different exercise means. But think about repeated rate of force development when you're doing Olympic lift. An Olympic lift, how many efforts are there in a single rep? You have the first pull, you have the second pull, you have the transition under the bar, you have the catch, and then you have the squat out of the hole. That's 5 efforts to complete 1 rep. And it's training the reflexes a lot faster than something like a loaded jump, because it's when you do a loaded jump, as soon as there's toe off, you have that entire time in the air to decide how you're going to organize yourself to land. In the Olympic lift, it happens within milliseconds. As soon as you finish that pull, that bar is coming right back down onto your shoulders to catch. So it trains like the reflexes a lot faster than something like an Olympic lift or even a medicine ball toss. The precision of force production, which we talked about earlier. Olympic lifting as a tool for conditioning, when you talked about alternating between the Valsalva maneuver to brace and produce force, alternating between that and quick, short, efficient breaths, tissue resiliency, exercise variation. I think exercise variation is often not part of the discussion when we were talking about whether or not you should include Olympic lifts. If you're only relying on loaded jumps and jumping variations, you're going to run out of variation at some point. And we need novel stimulus to keep eliciting adaptations. If you know how to do the full Olympic lifts, you can probably do all of the variants. If you know how to full snatch, you can probably power snatch, you can probably hang snatch, you can probably snatch from blocks, you can probably do high pulls, you can probably do pulls, you can probably do pause variations. There's so many, you're never going to run out of variation. And variation is extremely important for learning too, improving, like continuing to develop your learning behaviors too. So yeah, there's a lot more too. If you want to learn more, it's in my ebook. It'll be out next week. So yeah, there's more too. I just can't really think about it on the spot.
No, absolutely. And that kind of reminds me that you talk about the novelty of different variations for Olympic lifting. It brings me back to, I had a training partner who we used to do 1 day a week where we'd take 80% of a snatch, and then I would do a complex and she would do a complex. And then she would pick the next complex and we would just like probably end up getting 6 to 8 working sets with 80%, not even realizing it because every set was different. And that was around the time I had some of my best snatches, and we were getting all that work volume, but it was novel. And we were like mentally in it, and it was a lot of fun. But you really can't do that with a lot of other variations that involve all those components you just talked about, from the strength, from the precision, from the rate of force production, and from the body's ability to move fast. Right. I think that's like, people don't talk about how fast the body has to move to receive those bars after it produces maximum or close to maximum force output. So I think, you hammered home a lot of really good points on that question. And man, I'm excited to see this program and to hear about all the results you're going to be getting. Anything else you want to wrap up with?
Yeah. I want to add one more thing that you just reminded me on. What other exercise means trains the body's ability to get in and out of end ranges that fast under that high of loads? I think that's a pretty important quality to have. And that's not to say if you Olympic lift, you are like, you're never going to get hurt you're never going to get hurt putting yourself in compromising positions. I'm not saying that, but it is improving that quality and improving your competency in like the physical literacy realm. So yeah, you reminded me to say that point too. So
yeah, man. Awesome. Well, hey, I'm appreciative of your time. I'm excited we got to catch up again. And like I said, I'm excited to see this program come out, and all the people that are going to be jumping on it are going to be slamming dunks in no time and throwing some weight around. So thanks again for coming on, Will, and we'll catch you on the next time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, dude.
You got it.